All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Courtney Rousseau. I'm the current president of the North Carolina Purple Martin Society. Just a little bit about our group. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You can see our mission statement there below, and part of what we're doing tonight is public education, which is right in there with that mission statement. And we are affiliated with the PMCA, which is the Purple Martin Conservation Association. They are the national, and we are one of their local affiliates. And you can learn more about us at ncpurplemartin.org. So some things we're going to be learning today. A little bit of everything about purple martins. We're going to talk about their biology and their history of the purple martin and colony management techniques. We'll talk about NCPMS martin projects and how you can get involved with purple martins locally. So what is a purple martin? So this is a picture here of an adult male and an adult female purple martin. They are colonial cavity nesters. So that means that they nest in colonies, not as single pairs. And today, east of the Rocky Mountains, they use gourds and martin houses almost exclusively. Now you might be wondering what they sound like. So that's the sound of a happy colony there. They are the largest member of the swallow family, and if you are familiar with other swallow species, you may have noticed some similarities in their call. So here we have another example here of a male and female vocalizing in their gourd. So a little bit about the history of purple martins. So in modern times, east of the Rocky Mountains, the purple martin subspecies that we have here nests only in man-provided housing. Now, when did this start? This started a long time ago. Indigenous people used to put up gourds for these birds up on tall poles in open places, and it was believed that they did that for a couple of reasons. One of those was to help drive crows away from their crops. And another one of those reasons was because purple martins eat insects. That's all they eat are flying insects. So they were hoping they would eat the insects and keep them away from their crops. A little bit more about the history of martins. You can see this picture taken in 1892. It's been going on for a long time, people putting up housing for them. You can see it kind of in the back right of that corner of the picture there. Just kind of a neat old photo. So a little bit about identifying purple martins. This is the adult male. So as you can see, his coloration is all kind of a purplish bluish color. Purple martin people will often call these ASY males. So that means after second year. So this bird is at least 2 years of age when he gets his adult male coloration. He's the easiest martin to identify out of all the pictures I'll show you. Here we have an adult female, or ASY female, after second year. Again, she's at least 2 years of age. You can see that on the base of her tail down here, which is called the chrysum, that it's dark underneath. The adult females have that dark coloration on the base of their tail. They have a little bit of purple on their shoulders and back and on the back of their head, but most of their body is a brownish type of color. Subadult male. So subadult males are only 1 year old. We call them the silly teenagers of the group. So they don't have their adult male coloration yet, but they still have the adult male call, which has a little click on the end of it, which you may have noticed when I was playing that vocalization at the beginning of the presentation. The subadult males may look like females from a distance, but you'll notice they have individual purple spots. This guy on the right here has a few spots of purple on his breast feathers here, and this guy on the left has a few purple spots on the back of his neck and shoulders here. And it's what's fun about subadult males is you can tell the individual males apart because they all have different purple speckles in different places. So here's a subadult female, but she doesn't have as much purple on her as the adult female does. You'll see that she's more of a brown color. And the chrysalum, which is the area under the base of her tail here, is more white with either totally white or just with a little pinstripe of brown down in the middle of that tail area, as opposed to the adult female that had more of a solid brown color at the base of her tail. So purple martins, where do they breed? So they breed in the northern hemisphere and they winter in the southern hemisphere. Here, east of the Rocky Mountains, we have the subspecies called Prognesubis subis. So in the lower half right of your screen, you'll see a picture of a martin house with some gourds under it. And that is the subspecies that we have in this part of North America. There are two other subspecies of purple martins in North America. There's Prognesubis hesperia, which nests in cactus cavities made by woodpeckers in the Southwest. And then there's Prognesubis arboricola, which nests along the western coast of the United States. And both Prognesubis hesperia and Prognesubis arboricola are also low in numbers. Prognesubis subis is the most common martin that we do have in North America as far as population goes. Now, they only have one brood per year. They lay one clutch of eggs, they raise one brood of babies, and then that's it. They need our help. Their population trends have been going down. There's been roughly a 33% population loss between 1970 and 2021. So yes, what we do matters for them, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But before I leave this, you can see on the map at the top, there's some dates here and some different colors on the map. So what that indicates is with the northern migration, this is when they are starting to come in their version of spring to come breed. So in the southern part of the United States, in Florida and in Texas and Louisiana, they start arriving to the United States as early as January 15th. In some cases, I've even heard of them coming as early as Christmas. And they're coming in early to those southern areas to get the best breeding spots. I'll talk more about that a little later. And then they're working their way up the U.S. as the season advances. And by March 1st, they are here in North Carolina. I typically see them here in Wake County by the last week of February. So more about the migration north. Some people will use a term called scouts that you may have heard of in reference to martin colonies. So all a scout really is the oldest martin, and they arrive first. They want to get there first because they want to get their favorite cavity at their chosen breeding site. So purple martins exhibit what's called site fidelity. So what they do is when they breed at a certain colony, if they successfully fledge young at that site, those same adults will come back again the following year. And those scouts or oldest martins want to get there first because they know what cavity they already want at a colony site. Subadults or subbies or SYs, the pictures I showed you earlier of the younger martins, they typically arrive later in the season after the adults, 4 to 6 weeks after. A little bit of a myth buster there for you. Scouts do not fly back to Brazil to recruit more martins. It used to be in the old days that people thought that they would have one scout that would show up at their purple martin colony, and then that one scout would then turn around, fly all the way back to Brazil to get more martins to come back to the colony. We know that is not true through scientific studies. The picture on the bottom right just shows a pair of martins that have returned to their colony site, and they're waiting for the landlord to please put their house back up for them. See, it's not quite up there yet. This picture on the top right shows martins that have just crossed the Gulf Coast through migration, and they're resting on these houses before they continue their trip north. So migration south and martin roosts. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program, but martins will form large groups in migration south also after they raise their one brood of nestlings. So where are martin roosts located? So there are large martin roosts in certain spots of the United States. One of them, notably, that the PMCA likes to talk about is in Presque Isle, Pennsylvania, and they will roost on the reed beds down there on the bottom right corner of the picture there. So in North Carolina, there are 2 known martin roosts that are on the coast. And one of those has been at the Umstead Bridge in Mans Harbor, North Carolina. There used to be several years ago boat tours that you could take through a charter service to come take you close to the roost site. They would take people there at sunset, and you could see all the martins swirling around like a tornado, and they would come down and roost on the beams under the bridge. There haven't been as many martins there in recent years. The roost seems to have moved a little bit. So the picture on the right shows where they have been in recent years. They've been roosting at the Nutrien phosphate plant in Aurora, North Carolina. And there have been so many of them that you could see them show up on Doppler radar in the summertime in early mornings. You can see the roost ring that shows them leaving the roost site, and they show up on the radar. So this was another example of how it looks on the radar. This is one from Louisville, Kentucky. Pretty cool, all those martins dispersing in the morning. So let's talk a little bit about where martins go on migration. So the PMCA and their affiliates have done lots of studies using geolocators and GPS tags to try to figure out where these martins are going on migration and how long they are staying in these particular areas. And some of the data has shown us the paths they use for migration and their overwintering sites. And they're all slightly different depending on the bird and the geolocator tag and its home colony site. This particular bird that's shown on the map on the right was one that was from Erie, Pennsylvania. And you can see by the end of August with the red color on that map, that bird was already heading south. And it headed south and went a different route back to Brazil than it used to go north. When it headed north in the spring, it flew right over the Gulf of Mexico. So that's pretty interesting. We would like to do some more geolocator studies with birds from North Carolina. We're hoping to get enough funds and interest and manpower to do that in the coming years. That would be very useful for conservation purposes to figure out where our martins in North Carolina are using for roost sites and what paths they're using for migration. So some interesting things about purple martin courtship. They do not mate for life. So they may or may not pair up again when they come back from migration, but oftentimes the males will choose different females, the females will choose different males, etc. That's been proven through banding studies. So a little bit about nest building and incubation. On the top left here, we have an ASY, that's an adult male with a green leaf. So what's interesting about purple martins is they use green leaves when they build their nest. So that's one of the ways you can tell that you're looking at a purple martin nest when you're inspecting the cavities. Females have a brood patch like many other songbirds when they're incubating eggs, and that helps them to keep the eggs warm. Incubation lasts 16 days, and the young may not hatch on the same day. Sometimes there's a day or two difference. You hope not more than 2 days difference between the nestlings because they grow so fast. Every day they're a little bit bigger. So we hope there's not more than a day or two between them, and usually there's not. So another thing you'll notice about this nest on the bottom left is the eggs are white. Nestling phase. So martins spend a long time in the nest, a lot longer than many other songbirds do. It takes them 28 days to reach fledging age. Anywhere from 26 to 30 days is average for a purple martin to leave the nest and fledge. So why is that? That is because they need to be able to fly very strongly as they leave their gourd or their martin house. It is not normal to find a purple martin hopping around on the ground. They eat, bathe, and drink while flying. So they need that time in the nest to develop their flight muscles and their flight feathers. So it takes them a little longer to get out of their nestling phase. And then after they fledge, their parents continue to take care of them a week or two after fledging to teach them how to catch flying insects. You can see we got a picture of hatchlings on the bottom right, and then in the nestling phase, that's about 2 weeks of age. They're in the middle, and then on the top right, that's how the martins look right before they're about to fledge. Those birds are about 26 days old. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. What is a martin's diet? They only eat flying insects. So they're not going to come to your bird feeder. They're not going to come to a suet feeder, etc. So they're only interested in catching insects out of the air. They eat a really wide variety of flying insects. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but they don't specialize on any particular insect. But they do not eat mosquitoes or eat almost no mosquitoes. That is another common myth that was developed around the 1950s by someone who wanted to sell a whole lot of martin housing. So unfortunately, that is not true. They do not eat mosquitoes. That's been proven through studies by the PMCA also. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the main thing is the martin is the highest flying swallow species. They eat very high up in the air. The mosquito is low to the ground, and they're feeding in the middle of the day when the mosquito is not as active too. So I'm sorry, they will not eat your mosquitoes, but they do eat deer flies, June bugs, Japanese beetles, horse flies. They will also eat cicadas, and there were plenty of cicadas for them to eat this year earlier. So some more pictures of things that they eat here. You'll see some wasps on their diet. You'll see flying ants. You'll see dragonflies. You'll see some butterflies. You'll see beetles, almost anything that they can catch. So because they are so dependent on flying insects, poor feeding weather can really affect them. So after 3 days of cold or rainy or really windy weather, martins can starve to death. This is especially an issue when they arrive so early in the season, end of February, beginning of March, when the weather patterns may not be settled. They can starve to death. So if you have a colony, you can actually try feeding them, and people can train them to be fed. And it's kind of funny. Now remember, they eat flying insects. So the way that they are trained to eat from a feeder is first the landlord or the caretaker of the colony can take crickets or mealworms and they'll fling them up in the air with a slingshot or a spoon. I kid you not. And that bird sees that flying insect through the air and it keys onto it. And it sometimes takes them a few times to see some crickets flying through the air, but they will catch them in their beak. And then they will learn that the landlord is trying to feed them. And then after they've caught a few in the air, you can transition them to a platform feeder. And then you can even train them on scrambled eggs, which are a lot cheaper than crickets. So you might say, well, that's very interesting, and I want to put up a martin house to help them out. How do I do it? Let's get started. But hang on. Before you put up martin housing, it is not as simple as simply putting up a martin house, and we'll talk about what that means here. First of all, do you live in the martin's breeding range? If you are tuning in North Carolina, most likely, yes, you do. Now, the most important thing is, do you have a good site location with open flyways? And I'll talk about what that means pretty soon. And are you willing to manage the housing? And we'll also discuss what that means. So good open flyways. Where you need to site a martin house or a gourd rack is a wide open location away from trees. The number one mistake people make when they're trying to set up martin housing is they put it too close to trees. So what you need is at least 40 feet of space around your martin housing, between your martin housing and any nearby tall shrubs or trees. The further than that is actually better. So in this picture on the left here, you can see that they have sited the martin housing at least 40 feet away from these tall trees and 30 feet minimum from your house. They like to be near people, but not more than about 30 feet to your house. In the picture on the right, this is a situation where it's a waterfront, and that can also be successful. You see on the shoreline that the trees have taken up the space on the shoreline, so there's no open flyways on the shoreline, but this person has a boat dock or a pier, and they situated their martin housing on the end of the pier, and that can also be successful because it's a nice open flyway. So we tell people, please don't do it the hard way. Your nest monitoring, your nest checks and management should be easy and enjoyable. So the hard way. Down here on the left, we have someone who has put gourds up in an old tree in the middle of a field. So that's very rustic and interesting looking, but that is totally inaccessible without a ladder. If a gourd falls down, you're going to have to get back up there on a ladder and hang it up. There's no way to safely lower that. There's no way to clean it out for nest checks or anything without getting up on a ladder. We don't recommend you do that. On the top right, tilt poles. I've seen a lot of old colonies that have tilt poles on them. That's fine at the end of the season for cleaning out, but during the active season, those poles are inaccessible because if you tilt that house on its side during the active season, those babies and those eggs are going to fall out. If you have a situation where eggs have fallen out of the nest or babies fallen out of the nest, and you need to return them to their cavity, that's pretty hard to do if all you have is a tilt pole. So please don't put up a tilt pole. So another situation we see sometimes is people will put up a house that has inaccessible compartments. So this person on the bottom right has built a house, and it's an interesting looking homemade house, but they've just drilled holes in the piece of wood there on the side, and there's no way to access the individual compartments. So that makes it hard to manage. So don't make that mistake either. So some more examples of unmanageable housing. So this is kind of funny here. Red Roof Inn, Sleep Cheap. We call it the Leaning Tower of Martin here on there. So these two Martin houses in these pictures are on stationary poles. So again, there's no way to access them without a ladder, and the compartments do not open. This giant Martin house on the right was actually in the Guinness Book of World Records for the biggest Martin house ever built. I don't know if that record still stands or if that's still the record holder there. And it was quite a work of art and something to see, but again, it was almost impossible to manage. So what is manageable housing? You want housing or gourds that raise and lower easily on a pole, about 12 to 18 feet high. 15 to 16 feet is about average. You want it so that you have easy access to the compartments or gourds. You need your doors to open on the house so you can access them for nest checks and cleanouts. You need to have gourds that have access caps that you can unscrew and get into, like the picture on the right. And you want your house, if you use a house, to have larger cavities, 6 to 7 inches wide and tall and about 12 inches deep, with starling resistant entrances. And we'll talk about why that's important in a minute. So Martins are 7.5 inches long. They're the largest member of the swallow family, which I mentioned earlier. So they need a nice deep compartment. And some of the houses that are on the market are old fashioned and have 6 inches by 6 inches compartment. And that's really too small for Martins. If you think about a male and a female, both 7.5 inches long, and then an average clutch of 5 to 6 eggs. And as those babies grow and they fledge, they're the same size as the adults. And that gets really crowded really fast. So we recommend deep compartments for that reason. And also we tell people to stay away from telescoping poles. Telescoping poles can get stuck. They can pinch your fingers. They can really do a number on you. So, and they get really hard to manage when they're full of eggs and nestlings. So try to stay away from those. So examples of manageable housing. Here we have a trio house that's been modified to have 6 by 12 inch compartments. And that's what this looks like here on the bottom left. It's a nice deep compartment. Here we have a Lone Star Goliath house. Now that house comes from the manufacturer with 6 by 12 inch compartments, so it's already the right size. And then the T14, which is available from the PMCA or from Troyer, or you can build one from plans, and they're also 6 inches by 12 inches, and the doors also open individually. If you already have a Martin house, it's important to remember that any house can be modified and improved with a little bit of work. So it is possible, if you have one, to make it better. So another thing to consider is gourds are a good choice, especially in this part of the state. Gourds are really popular for Martins, and they actually prefer them. If you're trying to set up a new colony, we really recommend in this area of the state that you use gourds instead of a house, because Martins are just more attractive to gourds here. So some benefits of gourds include reduced nest and porch domination and a higher occupancy rate per pole. Oftentimes when you have a Martin house, you'll have one male who's pretty dominant, and he may take over an entire floor of a house. So instead of filling up all those cavities, you may only get half the number of pairs you could have had because you've got one male taking over a whole side of a house. So when you have gourds, that's a lot less likely to happen. So we recommend you use opaque gourds without excess caps. Remember, these purple Martin colonies are in full sun. So you do not want a gourd that's going to heat up and that's translucent and causes a greenhouse effect. So some of the higher end quality gourds are opaque. So just make sure that you're buying a good gourd or growing a good gourd, a nice big gourd. We recommend that you use a pulley or a winch operated gourd rack. That makes it really easy to manage, raise and lower and clean out, etc. So attracting Martins to a new site. So Martins are social, they nest in colonies. So some things that attract them to his new site include the use of a decoy. You can put a purple Martin decoy on top of a Martin house or a gourd rack. And you can use a recording called the Dawn Song. You can play that in the morning and it will bring Martins in for a look at your site. Now, the PMCA also sells nest checking tools, and those are laminated pictures of babies, life-size pictures of babies. So if you have babies in your nest and you don't know how old they are, you can compare them to the picture And that will tell you how old they are. And then from there, you can calculate when they're due to fledge, because remember, that needs to be at least 26 days of age, 26, 28 days of age, and you'll know when those babies should be fledging. They also have a prognosticator tool that's for calculating hatch date and fledge date, etc. So monitoring can be really fun. There are some people that use Nest Cams, myself included. I have 4 Nest Cams on one of my sites. And the PMCA also has a Nest Cam that's available 24/7, and you can watch your Purple Martins raise their babies. So let's talk a little bit about management. So it's recommended by the PMCA that you conduct weekly nest checks. Why should you do nest checks? So the whole purpose of doing nest checks is to check for problems and correct them. So some problems that could be encountered in a nest check include dead martins, dead nestlings, capped eggs, injured birds, blocked entrance. All those things can happen. Unfortunately, sometimes you find snakes in houses and gourd racks, especially if you don't have a good predator guard on your pole, and I will talk about what that is about in just a minute. So the PMCA recommends people do nest checks, and you can do it throughout the season. You check percent occupation, and they're fun and educational. And what you can do through the season, if you've got that data, you can submit it to their program called Project Martin Watch. And the PMCA takes that data and they use it to track population trends of martins across North America, to track how their breeding seasons are going. So I believe last year we only had 2 landlords in North Carolina that were reporting data. I was one of them. So I know they would love to have more people participate in that process. Other management practices for sites include parasite control and supplying calcium and grit. What you can do is you can put up a platform feeder for them, and you can put crushed eggshells there or crushed oyster shell there. And you can also provide extra nest material on a raised platform for them, a handful of pine straw or oak leaves. They really love those, and it's really fun to see them go down to the platform feeder, grab the eggshells or grab the nesting material and take it back up to their gourd. It's really neat to see them do that. So predator guards, let's talk about this. You should protect your martins from predators. Use pole guards. Every birdhouse needs one. Now, this doesn't just apply to purple martins. It also applies to bluebirds, tree swallows, chickadees, titmice. Any birdhouse you have on your property, you need to have a predator guard for it. And this picture on the left shows a raccoon looking up through a baffle or predator guard to a pole. Now that is a type of baffle that you can build at home if you are handy, and we have plans for that baffle available on our website, ncpurplemartin.org, if you want to check for that. Also, squirrels, as you see in that middle picture, will raid birdhouses, and snakes can climb any pole. You see on that right, that is a metal pole. They can climb any metal pole, any wooden pole. It doesn't matter what kind of it is. They can even climb a greased pole. So please put a predator guard on your pole to protect your birds. So if you do build a stovepipe type baffle, which is that type on the left, it needs to be at least 24 inches long and at least 8 inches in diameter. Bigger is better. You need to mount it so the top of the baffle is at least 4 feet from the ground. And if you can get or build a removable predator guard, that makes for easier management, because then you can lower your housing down and do nest checks and cleanouts as needed without the baffle getting in the way. So a little more about predator guards. So you heard me mention the top of the guard needing to be at least 4 feet off the ground. So that picture on the left really illustrates what that means. So you can see that yellow line is drawn right at the top of that predator guard. So another thing you should notice about this pole is there's nothing on the pole under the predator guard that a snake or a raccoon could use as a ladder to get around that baffle. Some people make the mistake of having their winch or their rope pulley system underneath the baffle on the pole, and what happens is the snake or the raccoon then uses that as a launching point to get around the baffle. So you don't want to make that mistake. On the right, you'll see that this baffle is enclosing some of the rope and pulley hardware, and that's really a better way to do it, because then that snake or raccoon cannot use that hardware to get around the baffle because the baffle is enclosing it. So another thing with purple martin management is you need to make sure you control non-native nest site competitors. There are two invasive species that compete with native cavity nesters here, and these two species not only affect martins, they affect bluebirds, tree swallows, chickadees, woodpeckers, etc. And those two birds are English house sparrows and European starlings. In case you're wondering what they sound like, you may have heard that in a Lowe's or Home Depot parking lot. That's the male English house sparrow. He has a black bib there. And then the female is in the middle here in this picture. And they will often take over unmanaged martin houses, and they will often take over bluebird houses. On the right here, we have a European starling. Starlings also will kill martins. They'll throw out babies, they'll kill nestlings, and they can be pretty dangerous for other native cavity nesters as well. That's the song of the starling. You notice the starling has kind of a blackish body and a long yellow beak and pink legs. Some people get them confused with martins. So how do you keep starlings out of your gourd or your house? So you can use something called starling resistant entrance holes, or SREH. So the most common of those is called the crescent entrance hole. And these are the dimensions of the crescent entrance hole here on the bottom right. 1 3/16 inches across the middle on a 3-inch circle. So that height is very critical. Any bigger than that, a starling can get in. Any smaller than that, and a martin cannot get in. There are other types of SREHs that have been developed. The crescent is the most common. Here's a few of the other ones that you may see on other gourds. Particularly Troyer gourds have this Conley 2 entrance hole. You'll see that pretty commonly there. So when you have an SREH, or starling resistant entrance hole, correct porch mounting is absolutely critical to keep the starlings out. So you want the base of the porch to be 1/8 inch or less from the base of the crescent. If the porch is too low under the SREH, the starling can push himself in sideways. So having a porch this close to the base of the SREH prevents the starling from being able to use his long legs to push himself in. So another threat that purple martins face is hawk and owl predation. There are barred owls and great horned owls. Both of them will predate upon martin colonies occasionally. And there are ways to keep them out of your martin housing. Some people build cages around their martin housing. This also will work against Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks and peregrine falcons to help keep them away from the entrance of martin housing. There are commercial owl guards. That's this picture of this prawn here on the bottom left that you can also use to help keep large raptors away from the front of your gourd rack. And another method that some people use is to place martin decoys on poles or sticks around the martin colony site to help distract the hawk or the owl away from the colony site. Usually the hawk will go for the slowest moving bird. It'll hit the decoy and the real martins will have a chance to fly away. So some people try to set up a colony and they see a bird and they wonder, ooh, is this a martin? So these are some birds that are regularly confused for martins. Here we have the barn swallow on the left, and then the tree swallow on the right. The tree swallow is smaller than the martin and it has a white belly. And then the barn swallow is also smaller than the martin and is not a cavity nesting species. Every year I get an email or two from somebody who says, I have purple martins nesting on my porch, what can I do? And I ask them to send me a picture, and it's always a barn swallow. So that's one that's commonly confused there. And the tree swallow is a cavity nesting species. So that is one that may end up in your martin housing if you don't provide it separate housing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So some other birds that might try to use your martin housing if you don't have martins include these species here on the screen. We've got the eastern bluebird. Most folks know what those look like, but they're also looking for a home. House finches, which is less common, but it does happen occasionally. They will try to nest in a martin house or a gourd. Another species is a great crested flycatcher. If you have your housing near a wooded area, sometimes they'll try to get in there. The tree swallow, as I mentioned, on the bottom left, the house wren in the middle there, and a tufted titmouse or even a Carolina chickadee is another possibility. So what should you do if one of those native cavity nesters is trying to nest in your martin housing? So it's important to remember that the right location with the right setup of houses can host martins and those other species. What you need to do is at the beginning of the season, if you notice, for example, a bluebird is starting to bring nesting material into a martin house or a gourd, what you need to do is close off the martin house or the gourd and put up a bluebird house for those bluebirds 30 feet or so from your martin housing to give those bluebirds a place to go. And once the bluebirds have laid their first egg in that box, then you can go ahead and open up the martin housing and the bluebirds will be established in their own spot. Same situation for tree swallows. Sometimes they'll try to get in a gourd rack or a martin house too. So let's say you're opening up your martin housing or your gourd rack and you've got a nest in there and you're not sure what you're looking at. So, and you don't see a bird there. So a house sparrow here on the top left, again, that's a non-native invasive species. They tend to really pack compartments really full of stuff. And when their nest is finished, it has like a tunnel-like a shape over the top of it there. So that's a good illustration of what a house sparrow nest looks like. Compare that to the right. You've got a tree swallow here actually on a nest in a gourd. Tree swallows like to use lots of feathers in their nest. They especially are fond of white feathers. Then there, compare those two to the actual purple martin nest on the bottom left. Again, we've got the white eggs, we've got green leaves, and more of a flat shaped nest. Compare that to the starling nest on the right. That is a bulky nest with loose material. Now let's talk about what eggs look like. So how to become a martin egghead. So A, B, C, and D are all purple martin eggs. So A is an old egg that did not hatch in a nest and got really dirty. So kind of at the end of the season, if you see an old egg in your nest, they may look like that. So B is a capped egg. So what happens, this is one of the reasons you do nest checks, to check for capped eggs. Sometimes when eggs are hatching in a nest, they're hatching faster than the adults can remove the shells or consume the shells. And what happens is you get a hatched eggshell. It will roll over on top of an unhatched egg, and it will produce a cap on that egg, and it will prevent the chick from hatching from that egg. So if you find one of those on nest check, it's possible to very gently remove that cap, and that will enable that egg to hatch normally. C is a normally hatched egg, and then D is a fresh egg. So compare that to E, which is a tree swallow egg. You can see the tree swallow egg is also white, but it is a lot smaller than a martin egg. Now look at F and G. F is a European starling egg. Compare that to a bluebird egg on the right. Both of these are blue eggs. Most times, most bluebird eggs are blue. Very rarely you'll see a white egg, but most of the time they're blue. And the bluebird egg is going to be a lot smaller than the starling egg. And then look at H and I. H is a house sparrow. That's a non-native invasive species. Compare that to the house wren egg. The house wren egg is a little smaller than the house sparrow egg. Again, more nests you may see in your martin housing that are not martin nests. You got your bluebird nest here. They tend to be nicely woven in a circle with pine straw or grasses and then blue eggs. Carolina chickadees and tufted titmice tend to start their nests with a base of moss, and then they'll add other material on top. You can see that the chickadee's nest is finished off with nice soft material, and then their little spotted eggs there on the bottom left. And then house wren nests, they use a whole lot of sticks. So just for interesting purposes here, a rare and interesting purple martin nesting locations. These are not normal. They're just kind of neat. So there was a documented case of martins nesting in the BP sign at a gas station in Tennessee some years ago. You can see them there on the picture. And then on the right, there was a case of martins nesting in a streetlight in Orlando, Florida. And that streetlight to me looks like a horizontal gourd. There are different styles of gourds. There are upright gourds, which we call vertical gourds, and there are horizontal gourds, and that to me looks like a horizontal gourd. And here's a few more cases. Purple martins nesting under Spanish roof tiles in Okeechobee, Florida. So that's kind of interesting too. Very unusual and rare though. So what is a martin landlord's goal? So the goal of a martin landlord is to fledge healthy, strong young. So again, these martins are dependent on man to provide housing for them. So even way back before European settlers arrived, the Native Americans were putting up housing for them. And as that tradition continued, we had more people move to North America. We had loss of native cavity sites, such as old snags that were cut down. These martins started using more man-made housing and having less cavity sites available to them naturally. So we want them to fledge healthy, strong young from housing that we provide for them. The average success rate, egg to fledge success, is about 50%, but in good years, it can be as high as 70 to 80%. And the success rate is especially high in managed housing. So what's our role in conservation? We try to remember that the Purple Martin's future is in our hands. So what we do is some scientific research. We do some banding and tagging projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have some coming up very soon. We do public outreach through social media accounts and through educational events in person and online, like this one tonight. And then we do conservation projects. We have public Purple Martin sites in Wake County, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. So why should you get involved with Purple Martins? And it has been shown by PMCA that martins experience much greater nesting success when people take an active role in their survival. They do nest checks, they manage the colony, they clean out the gourds, they take care of the equipment, etc. So martins will not abandon their nests when inspected. They are very site loyal to their nests. And it's again recommended by the PMCA to monitor the nests and to keep records. It's very similar to the Cornell Nest Watch program, which you may have heard of. So here's some martin sites in Wake County. On the left, we have Yates Mill Pond Park. That's a 24 gourd rack there. That's located in Raleigh. Above, we have a Prairie Ridge Eco Station that's run by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And on the right, we have NCSU Faculty Club, also known as University Club. We have two 24 gourd racks out there. And then below, we have Sug Farm Park in Holly Springs. Yates Mill Pond Park takes volunteers, and you can work with their Nest Watch program there. And Prairie Ridge Eco Station, you can check through the museum if you want to work with their nests out there. And at University Club and Sug Farm Park, I'm managing those volunteers. So if you're interested in working out at either of those sites, if you happen to be closer to Holly Springs, you can let me know. I live near that area. We work out at Sug Farm Park. So what do you do when you get involved? So we need people to start new sites. If you have a public area at a park, or if you just have a great site in your backyard, we would love more people to start sites. We need nest monitors to help us monitor nests and keep records throughout the season. In the beginning of the season opening, we need folks to help us hang gourds, get housing ready. And at the end of the season, we need folks to help us take down and clean out, because it's a lot of cleaning out that has to be done. And then for special projects like banding. So Purple Martins need us. A little bit more about outreach and teaching and youth involvement that we do. So we do banding every year. We have a bander from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences that bands at 2 of our sites, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. We do public events. We have tents, so we give out information about martins and talk with landlords about management practices. We've done outreach events with youth, Boy Scout, Eagle Scout projects. The one at Yates Mill Pond Park was actually part of an Eagle Scout project that was done. And then we've had small groups of youth come out to some of these public sites to learn a little bit more about Purple Martins. So speaking of banding, here's some opportunities for you to see banding in action coming up really soon here. So Tuesday, June 18th, from 8:30 to 11 a.m., we're going to be doing banding at University Club in Raleigh. That is a property next to the vet school on Hillsborough Street, if you want to come out on that day. If you can't make that day, we're going to be doing some more banding at Prairie Ridge Eco Station. That's Wednesday, June 19th, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then if you can't make either of those days during the week, we have one more opportunity for you to come out and see banding, and that'll be Saturday, June 22nd, 8:30 to 11 a.m. at University Club. Again, that's that property next to the vet school on Hillsborough Street. And you can stop in at any time and come talk to our museum bander or come ask us questions. Okay, so back to conservation projects. So it's good to have a public martin colony. They help increase awareness of Purple Martins. There's so many people moving to this area that have never even heard of a Purple Martin. And oftentimes if people didn't grow up in a rural area, didn't grow up in a farm or with a family that already had martins, they may not have heard of Purple Martins. So you can even consider sponsoring a community martin project in your area. Sometimes schools have a great location and a great science program to foster awareness for Purple Martins. So that's another opportunity to combine education and conservation projects. Just remember that martins need our help to thrive. Please consider putting up purple martin housing or volunteering today. Almost every purple martin you see in the skies over North Carolina now came from somebody's gourd rack or somebody's purple martin house that they cared enough to erect in their own backyards. And this is the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Courtney. This is really fascinating. And I just want to open it up now to some Q&A. So if anyone has some questions, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. I did kind of want to start off with one question. I know near the beginning of the lecture, you're talking about some of the larger roofs in North Carolina, the Umstead Bridge one, and I forget the name of the other, but I was interested, like, why the purple martins were drawn to those sites in particular. What about those environments made so many choose those areas?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure that I know specifically why, but I do know that some of those sites have some characteristics in common with some other documented roost sites across North America. There have been other bridge roost sites, like in Louisiana, that are very similar to the one at Old Man's Harbor. So that might be a reason why they picked that area. And the same thing for the reeds. There's old mine pits filled with reeds at Aurora at the phosphate plant. And I think it's just very similar to, for example, the Presque Isle roost in Pennsylvania. They may pick those because they're harder for predators to access. And they're near a water site. So there's a wide availability of insects flying around water. So it's easy food for them, and it's on their migration pathway. So I think that's probably why. I would love to know locally where our martins in Wake County are going for a roost. So that would be an area for more research.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Another question I had was what made you get specifically into purple martins for so many bird species? What drew you to them?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What specifically about purple martins got you really invested in them? Like, how did you kind of come into this work and fall in love with them?
Oh boy, that's a long story, but I'll
Yeah.
try to sum it up the best I can. So I remember as a child, my family had a very small property on the Pungo River, which is in Hyde County. And our neighbor put up a martin house one year, and I could see the martin house from our porch. And I remember sitting out there and watching them while I was eating lunch and thinking that was the most amazing thing ever. I've always been a lover of nature, and I loved watching all these birds sitting on the house and socializing, and I loved their calls, and I just thought their song was so beautiful. And I thought maybe one day I can have a martin colony. That would be so neat. And then fast forward many years later, I'm living in Wake County, I'm owning my own house, and I'm out gardening in my yard, and I hear a martin flying overhead and calling. I go, oh, wow, there's martins here too. Let me see what I can do. So started my own journey of becoming a purple martin landlord, met some like-minded folks, and we joined together.
So, do you have any other questions for Courtney? Oh, yep. Will this PowerPoint or the seminar notes be available after the session? Yes, so after the session, this whole recording is going to be posted on the Raleigh Parks and Rec YouTube. And that'll be available later this week. We'll send a link to that. Do you have any other questions? Great. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you everyone for joining in. So I'll be basically later this week, you will get another email form as well as a link to this recording. But I hope you all have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your weeks. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.